everyone, welcome back. We start with our new series of those chats with culture creative consultants, experts, advisors around Europe. I'm so delighted to welcome as my first guest a fellow culture policy designers networker. We go all the way now to Malta. Welcome, Toni Attard.
Hello, Ragnar. Hello, everyone. Such a pleasure to be virtually here, although I would rather be in the same room with everyone.
Absolutely. Toni is very well known in the circles of culture creative industries, policy and development, not only here in Europe, but across the world. Toni, you have the creative blood and culture blood running through your veins. You have been an actor yourself, a theater director, a festival organizer and festival director. You've written policies for your government in Malta. And now, for the past few years, you've been running a culture creative consultancy called Culture Venture out from Malta. How are things in Malta at these turbulent times?
Well, we've entered another phase, I think, at this point, where more restrictions are being removed. So people can now, shops are slowly reopening. But of course, we can't say the same thing for the cultural sector. You know, similar to other situations across the world, the first to shut down and probably the very last to reopen in whatever format we're talking about. So, you know, on a good side of our story is that the cases have been quite stable, testing has been quite high, deaths are rather low, although of course unfortunate, and so far people seem to be abiding by the restrictions and staying at home as much as possible, although we're challenging ourselves now because the more sunshine we see out there and the more we start smelling summer and the sea, it becomes even more tempting for everyone to head out.
What's your biggest learning from this crisis so far? How do you think culture creative sectors have done during those crises?
I think from a global point of view, I think it highlighted a little bit the situation on cultural leadership. So we've seen a kind of the variety of those of public institutions and also private institutions and networks that are really well equipped in terms of advocacy. Others who were kind of reacting very late to what was happening. So funnily enough, I thought that the case for the culture and creative sectors was kind of quite strong, and there was a kind of a strong base, but I'm starting to question that a little bit. Perhaps we have highlights in certain European countries or in Europe in general, but on a global level, I'm convinced even more than ever that there's still a lot of work to do there. And on this scale, I'm not talking exclusively about the creative industries, for example, even in terms of cultural sector, the good old traditional, even subsidized or public investment. So even that kind of highlighted that there is space for much more advocacy, much more also evidence-based policy making. So I think that is from a leadership point of view. And also you start seeing the differences in how certain culture ministers presented their arguments versus others who just said, you know, so sorry, nothing much can happen here. That kind of showed that how much more work and also the importance, I would say, of civil society in this situation.
We are well in 2 months into the crisis. And it seems that everybody talks about culture creative industries. If they talk about culture creative industries, they talk about it as part of the problem, something that is, you know, collapsing, something that needs quick rescue packages, something that is not surviving without public support. Very little talk is about culture creativity as a tool of actually helping us to bring ourselves out of the crisis, to mitigate some of those consequences, to be actually part of the solution. What's your take on this?
We're still going through this kind of finding ourselves phase. Where are we and how? So, you know, this was also my first recommendation to all the people I worked with and people I supported in this process. You know, sort yourself out first. You know, it was, as always, it was fascinating to see so many artists across the globe being also what I keep on calling the frontliners of the soul, now to contribute to this and providing free content and creating work specifically online without thinking about, you know, how do I make sure that I'm okay and maybe more than just okay for the coming months. So I would say that is the first thing. And again, I wouldn't like to push the idea that the arts, in this case, or culture and creativity, can be part of a solution, because it kind of reinforces a little bit more a bit of this utilitarian thing. You know, when you're in a crisis, oh look, let's bring out culture. Of course we can do that, and of course culture can do that, but we also seem to keep on pushing the idea that in case everything else fails, try culture. And I wish we would start saying, actually, culture is there as much as everything else is. Now, of course, it might be utopic, or maybe, of course, preaching to the converted here. But I think, once again, the arts and culture have shown that, you know, people at home, what did they spend their time on? Most of the time trying to find and think of creative ways on how to keep yourself occupied, how to do things, so once again, arts and culture were automatically part of the solution. So next time round, from a policy making point of view, is, you know, remember when this crisis happened, you know, what did people do? So back to when Winston Churchill was asked, you know, why are we fighting the war, or whether we should stop funding the arts, then what's the worth of fighting? Why are we fighting a war then if not for culture? So I think, once again, we're going through a narrative which we've experienced for decades after decades, and yet again, arts and culture are showing it has to be part of any global conversation in terms of policy development, economic development, social development.
And has it been in Malta?
We've seen a mix of, first of all, a lot of artist-led initiatives, from online festivals to galleries shifting sales online to shows being devised and designed specifically for online or TV consumption. What was interesting, the measures which I was involved in terms of lobbying and advocating for, were also part of the package that were available for all industries. But I was actually so happy that actually arts and culture and the creative industries were the first, one of the first sectors in that list. So it was like, from a policy making point of view, I could see, okay, then there wasn't much of a fight, you know, hey, what about us, the artists? Of course, we had some subsectors like the film industry and publishing, which kind of initially was in a different category for support. There were also specific measures from the Arts Council, a specific call for projects to be created. You know, okay, that there was this rush to publish things online without even at times looking at the quality of the work. So there were certain issues which, because of this whole rush of feeling at times or wanting to be part of this community that contributes, and maybe a few felt that I don't have great work to share online because my work is, you know, is best consumed live. So we were caught up also with some works which in the long run may not necessarily help either the artist or the artwork or the genre itself, or even bring in new audiences. I mean, I fail to see how suddenly online audiences are tomorrow going to shift to walking into a gallery, walking into a theater, walking into a cinema audience. May not happen, and it's perfectly okay for it not to happen, but it's also a different audience.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, but now you brought very good specific examples as well. Something that a creative industry discourse has been kind of using arguments in the past 10 years is that culture creative industries are those, very agile, very moving, very mobile, very flexible. They are kind of in the forefront of innovation. This is where new ideas come from. Do you think that this crisis has proved those claimed, or rather disproved some of it?
I think there's a mix. I think that there's a mix in terms of, will the culture and creative industries lead to a vaccine for coronavirus? Probably not. But isn't that the solution we want right now? But when you think about it, aren't we also talking about well-being and the probability that mental health is as much as a crisis leading from this or emerging from this? And we have proof that there's a correlation between well-being, engagement in the arts, etc., etc. It can be part of a solution in various degrees. But what I keep on saying is that it is an active partner, and probably as an active partner, be it in the health sector, be it in design, in retail, in whatever, it needs to be equally an equal partner, and not, as I said before, like an addendum. Oh, now let's start thinking of this. And having worked on policy, I can reassure everyone that probably, of course, people in the health sector categorically believe how important the arts and culture and creativity is, and innovation itself. I often question whether people in the sector believe it themselves and have the right arguments in doing so.
Mm-hmm. You work not only theoretically, but very practically with creatives, with cultural professionals, with artists on a daily basis. Let's look at some of the actionable advice. I know it's almost impossible to give any advice at this moment. We have no idea what the future will bring, how long this all will last, and what will be the long-term impacts of this. But still, these people are coming to you, they're asking for your advice. What would you say for creative professionals?
I think we should all run a little bit of a stress test, like what the European Central Bank does to banks, and use this time. So if you've been in this period for like a month or two, I think it's a perfect example to say, okay, under duress, under this kind of economic situation, if you had to take this as a business, which parts of your work survived, which parts of your work actually just completely disappeared, and which parts did you actively manage to change and create? And I think this would give you a very clear understanding of which parts of your work is actually sustainable or unsustainable, or which part is it actually dependent on, say, exclusively public funding. So probably that part, being dependent on public funding, may be at risk if that public funding disappears. If, say, your audience, or say your engagement with a particular public has changed, I think it's also an opportunity to give a bit of this, what I call the stress test, in terms of, let me use myself as an example. So I run most of my work virtually, online, from my home. My office is at this part of my home. And I'm lucky enough that I work with different clients who also work online and virtually. And I know that that part can continue, assuming I am connected to the net. But projects which I directed and I physically needed to be inside the theater disappeared completely. Now, if I depended exclusively on that form of income, probably a wage supplement on that, of course, supported me, which in fact it did. But I've also realized that for certain actions, I can shift online, or I've actually shifted part of this into a television program and not a theater program, not a theater show. But it also revealed two things in my case. For example, like all my online delivery, I need to really train on how to deliver things online. I noticed that I had a skill gap there, which experience and being a theater person myself, I thought shifting online would be really easy. The second thing is other skills in terms of even communicating with people online. Very different to how you run meetings. For example, your focus groups in terms of when I do research or managing workshops. So in my case, it revealed gaps in skills which I thought I either didn't need or never thought I needed or never thought I could use. So I think this is what I would always recommend is this is really an opportunity which has been imposed on us in a way to figure out where we stand right now and also how we reacted even in times of crisis.
What about big institutions? What about theaters and opera and concert halls and they are much more inert, as you know. There's much more inertia there. What can they do except waiting this to pass, taking support package from the government, and then hoping that everything turns back to as it was? What can they do?
Oh, this is a difficult one because the larger you are, probably there are more constraints into what you can actually do, because you may have unions, you have large institutions, there's of buildings. So probably from a health and safety point of view, restrictions point of view. So the agility, of course, is less than a small organization that operates within. But, and we're starting to see this now from data that is emerging, probably larger institutions, especially those with large buildings, need to probably start thinking a little bit more in terms of the capacity to act smaller. So we're starting to see, large concert halls figuring out whether their seating can actually change from a 1,000-seater to a 400-seater. But we also start seeing large organizations who have more money, maybe more resources, acting on a very good archive, or acting on, like if you take the Berlin Philharmonic, for example, now we have the digital concert hall, which was already there, and of course became a very important tool. But I think that this is also important to understand that this change is not just going to be from an infrastructural point of view, probably from an organizational point of view. Probably, organizations who have had a rather weak digital team will probably realize that this is the time to start looking at that infrastructure. Probably institutions who have not invested so much in terms of their own facilities for audiences, probably the demands are going to increase, from toilet facilities, increased cleaning, sanitization of your backstage facilities, costumes, wardrobe. So there are a lot of things which will change in terms of the day-to-day practice and management. But, and I hope this is not bad news, if there is some kind of economic repercussion from this, it's time to bring out that manual, the post-recession, on how to address your work in the coming years, should there be increased financial losses.
Mm.
But in these large institutions, my recommendation would be not pull the plug on what keeps your soul going. You know, we've seen museums fire their education staff, you know, the first week, when probably that would have been the most important thing to keep your museum going.
What would you say to the local, regional, national governments or the EU? We already have heard instances where, as always the case, culture is the easiest to be cut. Culture is not important. Culture comes after, you know, the masks and food and education, everything else. So already now culture cuts are being underway. Why? What good recommendations do you have for the policymakers?
Well, in a very simplistic way, if we go through this once again and people are locked inside and they have no TV to watch, no movies to watch, no books to read, most of us have already read the books we have on our shelves. Very simplistic. But if you don't understand that, then it's going to be very difficult to understand the more complex issues when it comes to cultural rights, when it comes to even conversations on intellectual property. So I think that even basic understanding, which probably will come from the society you live in. If the community you work in gives value to arts and culture, if people are really, the propensity to visit is so strong, people want to go back to the theater, people want to go to a concert, people want to go to the cinema. If that happens, then governments need to listen to the people who live there, who they work for, and understand that people give value to that. So the moment you stop that, be it legally or financially or in one way or another, you are actually denying the rights you give to your citizens. But at this point, before even talking about rights, if we don't understand that it is also a need, if that is not understood, then I fail to see how any government can even understand why education is a need, or even the health sector is a need. But I think this is going to test once again how resilient the arts are, not in keeping on what they do best, which is create art and do that, but also how strong policymakers in arts and culture are to sustain that argument and to work with other policymakers on an international level.
My final question in this series is always the same. If we would have this phone call today, exactly in a year, in May 2021, what kind of a world would that be?
I am hoping that it is a world where you and I and other people can be together in the same place. Am I asking for too much? But a world where if we're in that same space, we give much more value to what we say in that room than what we could have said online. Because I'm now convinced more than ever that what can be an online thing, let it be an online thing.
Beautifully said. We are coming back to you hopefully soon for another chat. But until then, be safe and stay negative.
You too. See you soon.